Well, good morning and welcome into week 3 of our 5-week SBIR 101 cohort. I wanted to start out with a couple of updates. And so I don't remember last week if I let you know that Department of Education and Department of Transportation are also moving forward on their solicitations for this year. So that means that we've got Department of Education, Department of Transportation, Department of War, and NASA um, all have active solicitations right now. I believe Department of Transportation is still in pre-solicitation, so you can see the topics, but you can't apply. And so you'll need to go to their website to be able to find that. But I can put all of those in the follow-up email, just so that you have those if you are interested in looking at them and what they have to offer. Another piece is they have expanded direct to phase two opportunities. And so if you remember back last week where we broke down the different agencies, we we talked about only 3 of them having direct phase two authority. So it's Department of War, Department of Education, and NIH having the opportunity to skip over that phase one if you're a little more developed going directly to phase two. And actually, with this new reauthorization, they have expanded that. So Department of Energy has that as an option. Um, and there was one more, and I forgot what that is, but I'll put that in the follow-up email as well so that you have all of that information available to you. So this week, very quick recap just to talk about or to remind you what we've looked at for the past couple of weeks. Then we'll jump into communicating with program managers, how to do it, when to do it. We'll look at what it takes to get started. So just a really condensed version of what it is to apply to any of these funding applications. And then we'll jump into some proposal writing, what to do, what to avoid, and then we've got some homework for you. So very briefly, in previous sessions, we talked about completing your registrations, especially that sam.gov. And so if this is week 3, if you have started at the very beginning, um, you might have your sam.gov registration finished by now, but there's also a decent chance that it might still take a couple of weeks. When I registered an LLC, I believe it took 2 weeks. So somewhere between 2 and 6 weeks is what you're expecting for that timeline. In week 1, we did an SBIR STTR overview, just so you can learn about those programs. And then in week 2, we looked at the different agencies and we broke down, some of the similarities and differences between the agencies, what they're interested in funding. And we also looked at project scope. And before we jump into communicating with program managers, I don't have a section for this specifically, but your homework from last week was look at the different agencies and figure out which one, or if there are multiple, which ones are a good fit for you and your business, and think about why. So I want to open up the floor right now. If you would like to talk about what you found, which agencies are a good fit for you, and we could talk about that now.
Olga, did you want to go first or?
Yeah, sure, I can. So, well, because we have different technologies under R&D right now, I will be speaking about that the wellness device, should I say, for chicks. So, for that particular technology, 2 agencies would be a good fit for us. Well, first of all, that would be USDA. Based on their previous topics, and I saw their updates on April 30th this year. So they do not change topics as of now yet, let's say. So 2 topics would be appropriate, and I have question to you, John, how to choose the right one within the USDA. So the 2 topics would be obviously that's animal production and protection. And the second topic would be small and mid-sized farms, because our technology can benefit those two, I mean, particularly small and mid-sized farms as well. So, and another agency would be NSF, with their topic biological technologies, and possibly later on that could be a medical device topics as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that those are two good agencies for you to be looking at. And then to answer your question with USDA, which of the two topics is a better fit for you? It sounds like what I understand in your description of the technology is that the was that animal protection is the probably a better fit, just because when I think of small and mid-sized farms, I think a little bit more about the infrastructure of the farm and how to keep the farm moving, and not necessarily the animals themselves.
Got it. Okay.
I think small and mid-sized farms also is one where they're not saying that you're stuck using commercial off-the-shelf technology, but I think that they're expecting commercial off-the-shelf technology more than new innovation.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Mhm. They're both really good fits. How about you, Amy?
So it was really kind of amazing and cool. But as I went down the list, I could kind of see an application for almost all of the agencies, some a little bit more distant than others, but the ones that stood out to me the most were EPA, USDA, um, education, and even NOAA, just because it's got that focus on climate change mitigation and water availability. Um, so I think, I mean, I'm a firm believer in starting with baby steps, and I feel like maybe Department of Education would be the right place to start and ultimately move into the other areas like EPA and USDA. Um, what do you think? I mean, the reason why I'm saying this is because compost toilets have a huge educational component, right? People are not like like excited to try something completely new and unfamiliar unless they have some demonstration of how it could work in our world. So starting like with a school or a school district seems like a totally manageable thing. Um, but ultimately, I would like to get to the EPA because of the just that circular economy focus that they have, compost toilets and the just the whole process that I'm focusing on in my business really kind of responds to that need for circular economy in that area.
Mm. I think that you've got some pretty good ones there. I think that Department of Education might be a little bit harder to sell than EPA. Um, and I don't, no, I'm not, don't let this dissuade you if you feel like it's a better fit than what I'm thinking.
Okay.
But I don't want you to end up putting in the 160 hours for an application if it's going to be a harder fit
Mhm.
than something like EPA. That being said, I mean, if you have just this gut feeling that it's going to be a great fit, then don't let me stop you. Um, Generally with Department of Ed, and you can do this, I'm sure, but it may take a little reframing from how I understand what it is you're working on. But they're looking at how do you teach, sort of a pedagogy type innovation is.
Well, so it's not like an in-classroom sort of education. It's more
Mhm.
like lots of schools, especially the younger levels, like the grade schools now, they all have gardens, you
I
know,
see.
they've all got that growing component, that connection to nature component, and starting at that younger age actually feels more optimistic to me, right? They're not like completely traumatized by bad porta potty experiences like we all are. I think about a
Mhm.
porta potty and I instantly like clam up, right? So like to have one in their garden, or multiple schools, perhaps, depending on, what funding looks like. But just to have that be a part of their daily school routine, and to have kids understand like that what's getting deposited there just turns out completely different in just a matter of months, and to understand the science behind that.
Gotcha. Okay. Yes. Yeah. I see what sure the connection is now. Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's definitely doable. And I think that, if you have all of the registrations you need, I don't know where you are on sam.gov. But if you're there or if you're pretty close, Department of Education is open now. So we can start looking at that application and what you need to pull together for that.
Okay.
Amy,
Yeah.
I'm curious if you thought about the DHS, like FEMA in particular.
Yeah, so like I said, when I went down the list, I could see an application for almost all of them, right? Like DHS definitely like disaster resiliency, but the EPA also has Homeland Security, and I don't know if that's similar, like the disaster resiliency component. I mean, I could even see, DOT. I don't know, does DOT um, determine like highway rest stops and what those look like, or oh, like they could be compost toilets. They don't have to be what they are. Um, even
Yeah.
even Department of Energy, using
Mhm.
human manure as a form of fuel. I don't know. There was just a lot of I could see a lot of potential in all of these, but even like NASA, I don't know what they do with their waste up in space, but I know we're trying to get to Mars or to the moon or wherever, sometime in the future. And it would probably behoove us to understand like how to grow food up in space. So, um, yeah, it's lots of potential.
Yeah. Awesome.
Um, but given what I just explained about the education part, do you think do you agree that that might be a good first focus?
I think that is definitely worth looking into.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, thanks.
If I may
Awesome.
suggest, Amy, you better go to each particular agency you're looking at and look through their particular topics. So there are two ways to be compliant with their topic area, or to meet with the program managers at one of the in-person events and kind of uh, present your idea to them, so they possibly in the future they would make a topic. But if there is no topic posted for your area of interest or for your technology, it's really hard to get in to that particular SBIR grant program. So just look through the topics and see, okay, if there are anything you can fit your technology in.
Okay, thanks.
I'm glad you brought that up. That's one of the things that we'll talk about later in the presentation.
Great.
Awesome. Sheeta, how about you? We're talking about the agency fit.
Still working on that component and, looking into different areas.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, if you need any help with that, let me know, and we can have another meeting to talk about that.
Will do.
Cool. Well, let's jump into communicating with program managers. And in this section, we're actually going to touch on what Olga just mentioned. So, how to meet with them and a little bit about what to say and hopefully get your point across. So, when you are connecting with a program manager, keep in mind that there are grant agencies and contract agencies. And so, the way that you'll approach these will be a little bit different. So, when you're meeting with the program managers or these technical points of contact, um, make sure that you understand what the agency goals are first and foremost, and then make sure that your technology that you're about to propose is in line with that. So when you're talking to someone from a granting agency, keep in mind that they have relatively broad topics. Of course, there's some variability in how broad those are. In SF, you can propose nearly anything. Department of Energy, they have relatively small and narrow topics, even though they're both granting agencies. So think about that. And use conversations to narrow your scope and to gauge agency interest. So because these topic areas are generally pretty large, you can use these conversations to make sure that you really fit within the sort of the groove and the direction that they intended when they created that topic. These program managers, of course, because the topics are relatively broad, aren't looking for a single specific solution. And so they're open to entertaining several different ideas. And so you might have, your company working on one solution to the problem and a different company working on a completely separate solution, but for the same problem. And both of these have, we'll say, an equal chance of getting funding, and potentially multiple of them getting funding at the same time to solve that same problem. Usually, you can contact a granting agency at any point. And so the contact information is usually in the solicitation, and you can reach out to those contacts directly to ask any of your questions. Many of these granting agencies also have a contact person or form on their website. And so you can go there to send a message to them and start that conversation as well. Contracting agencies are going to be different because they have very specific topics. So when you have a conversation with them, use that conversation to determine if your proposed direction is of interest. And so again, because that topic is so narrow, they have a need that they have identified. And again, Department of War is usually the go-to example here. So if they have found that their equipment is not functioning in the way that they need it to, or they need some modification, a retrofit, if they need new technology to, to fit a new purpose that they've identified, they're putting that topic out to the public, and everybody will be working to try and figure out if their solution is the correct solution for that specific problem. And so you can use these conversations to, again, gauge interest and make sure that they understand what it is you're working on and they believe that you have something that they're interested in. So the technical point of contact is going to be listed in the solicitation, and very likely each topic is going to have a different point of contact that you would be reaching out to. Now, you can reach out and have these conversations in private during the pre-release period. And so the way that this works is as soon as the topics are posted, again, we're using Department of War as an example here. If you go to their website, you can see right now, I believe they have 150 something topics that are out. As soon as it's posted, you've got, I believe it's about 2 weeks where you can have private conversations with the topic authors. After that, they open the topic for you to actually submit applications. And once you hit that open period when you are allowed to submit an application, all conversations at that point must be answered on an online forum so anyone can see the questions and answers. And so it takes away some of that competitive advantage that you could have if you started early. That being said, not all contracting agencies give you the option of that online forum. NASA is a good example of an agency that just will not talk to you. So you've got the pre-release period. You can have those private conversations one-on-one with the topic author, and then as soon as it opens, they will not talk to you anymore. And so your window to have those questions answered is gone at that point. So you need to recognize that there is a little bit of a difference between granting and contracting agencies and what you can use conversations to help you do as you are writing your application. And so there are two main ways to connect, and Olga did touch on this a little bit earlier. The first is to go to an event. And so twice a year, they have an SBIR conference, and that's a great opportunity where you can show up and talk to several of the SBIR agencies' representatives all in one place. Typically, they've got at least five or six of the 11 different funding agencies that all show up. Usually they have presentations that they're a part of. They sit on um, uh, boards where you can ask questions to several of them all at once, and you can see what the differences are between the agencies. And they have what they call the SBIR Pavilion. So all of the agencies are down in the expo hall, and they're just in one area. You can just go table to table and talk to all of them all at once. And so this is a fantastic opportunity for you if you have a chance to go. They did one a little bit earlier in the year, so the next one will be closer to fall. I believe I think that they have a date for it, and it's slipped my mind at the moment, but I believe it'll be a little bit closer to fall later this year.
John, are
Yeah.
these usually in Albuquerque?
No, actually, these because they are national.
Uh-huh.
Um, in the past, they've gone back and forth between Austin, Texas, and National Harbor, Maryland. The last one they had was actually in Raleigh, North Carolina, but I believe they're going back to one of the other prior locations. I want to say that they're going back to Maryland, but I'm not 100% on that.
Okay, thanks.
And we do offer microgrants to help out with travel costs. So if this is something that you're interested in and you're definitely applying to an SBIR, but you just want to have those conversations, we can help you get there.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Mhm.
John, how about the in-person event? Hold on just a second. In a week about it. Yeah, so May 12th, 14th, and it's called America's Seed Fund Week. Is that going to be about SBIR as well?
So America Seed Fund Week, I'm glad you brought that up because that is, I think it's next week. Um, America Seed Fund Week will have representatives from, I think, all of the agencies. So I absolutely, that's a fantastic thing. I'm glad you brought that up. Um, it'll be virtual, so you don't have to go anywhere for it. And I will put that in the follow-up email too. Um, but you will be able to listen to uh, all the different agencies representatives talk. I don't know how much Q&A you'll have, but that would be a good point of contact for you to find out who's the representative, who you'd be able to reach out to. Usually they give you their contact information so you can send your follow-up emails directly to them. Um, and then you'll also be able to hear from FAST awardees. So I have a presentation at some point during that week. I need to go and see when it is. But I'll be talking about the Arrowhead Center and all the different programs that we have here. So you'll be able to hear from the different FAST sites across the nation and see what other opportunities exist out there for you as well. But yes, thank you for bringing that up. The other way that you can contact the program managers or the technical point of contact is looking at the specific topic and the point of contact for that topic. You'll see them labeled differently depending on which agency you're talking to. Sometimes it's technical point of contact or the TPOC. Usually that's Department of War. You might see program manager. You might see topic author. Those are all words that mean essentially the same thing. That's the person you go and have this conversation with. So if you wanted to reach out to that person directly, here's what we recommend. Uh, an email, it's only about a paragraph long at most, where you give your 1 to 2 sentence pitch, which is what we worked on earlier in our sessions. Um, you introduce your company with that. You talk a little bit about why your innovation is probably a good fit for them. And then you request a meeting. And then before that meeting actually happens, send a quad chart. Now, I'll mention a quad chart a couple times throughout the presentation. I'll give you an example at the very end, and that will actually be part of the homework. Oh, thank you, Olga, for putting that in the chat. But the quad chart will be part of the homework is to fill one out just so that you have experience, you know the format, and you can send this out and have those conversations as needed. Yep. So once you've sent that quad chart out and set up the meeting, what do you actually do with it? What does it look like? And these are the sections of the quad chart. But again, I'll give you an example in just a little bit. Do your homework. So make sure that you understand what the topic is getting at. What's the purpose of it? Who is it helping? What are the problems that they're trying to address? Make sure that you understand the agency. So somebody sent me this in an email earlier today that there's a big emphasis on the current administration's directives. And that's always the case, right? It's not this administration specifically, it's all administrations when they take office and when they start implementing their policies, all of the agencies will end up shifting to make sure that they're in line with the current administrative policies. So make sure that you're paying attention to that. And it is generally outlined on their website somewhere. What is they're trying to do, what the direction is, and then what their directives are specifically for the agency you're talking to. So make sure that when you have your conversation, you're prepared to explain how your innovation is in line, one, with the interest of the agency, and then two, with the directives that they've been given from the administration, whichever administration is in power. Be prepared. Do have a list of bullets that you want to talk about. Try not to treat it like a script or like an interview. Try and have a conversation. And then, as much as you can, listen to what they have to say. And if you can, have a Zoom call so that you can actually watch their facial expression. So, as you're talking, you can gauge their interest a little bit more than simply being on the phone potentially. And then, of course, find out where those interests lie after reviewing the quad chart. So in most cases, you can just ask them directly. And if you have a conversation either over the phone or through something like a Zoom or Google Meet, something like that, uh, generally speaking, they'll be more flexible with what they'll say, and it won't come across quite as polished as in an email. And so you might be able to get a little bit more information in how you can gauge their response through having a conversation in this method as opposed to an email. They might be a little more inclined to agree with you or be a little bit more optimistic toward your innovation in an email as opposed to over Zoom or, again, phone call, whichever. So as you, well, first, before we hit this next section, any questions? Nope. Okay. So as you're getting started and you are working on writing this proposal, of course, the goal is to communicate a novel solution to an important problem. And novel is a very important word here. And so this program is designed for not, well, excuse me, it's designed for new and innovative technologies. In some cases, that is commercial off-the-shelf technology where you are changing how something is being used for a new novel purpose. In other cases, they're looking for something that's completely new that's never been seen before. If you pitch your innovation as an iterative process, as simply changing something that already exists, there's a very good chance that SBIR won't be the right fit for you. It's not always the case. Like I said, sometimes the commercial off the shelf, you can get by in that, but generally speaking, they're looking for something that hasn't been done before. Now, as you're writing, you have to think about the two different audiences that you'll be writing to. First is non-expert reviewers. So you'll need to make sure that the language you're using is brought down to a level where somebody who's competent in the field, but not an expert in what you're doing, is able to read and understand. And so there might be an element of teaching where you're giving a little bit more of the foundational information to get your reader up to speed before you start giving them all of the technical information. And then with an expert review or an expert reviewer, and you'll have both of these in many cases, it's somebody who again, an expert in the field, potentially an expert in something that's close to what you're working on, but maybe not exactly what you're working on. And so you'll need to be able to convince them that you do actually understand in depth the background information before you start getting into the technical plan. And then, of course, also convince them that your technical plan does have sound methodologies behind it. So you need to think of your proposal a little bit like a sales document. And so you're persuading them and convincing them that you have what it takes to bring this product through the feasibility stage to get to that phase two where you start building out the MVP. Now, what happens? Oh,
Good
yes.
question. Yeah. So it seems like, well, we usually receive feedback for our proposal from 3 reviewers. Is there any like preset number or percentage of how many out of 3 experts and non-experts in reviewers?
Uh, it's hard to give a solid answer on that. Some of it is agency specific. If you are working with NSF or Department of Energy, and several of the other granting agencies, they're going to outsource the review process. And so they're outsourcing it to usually people in academia who are going to read and review. And so they are experts in the general topic, but again, maybe not experts in exactly what you're working on. It's hard to find somebody who's an expert in exactly what you're working on if you're coming up with an innovative technology that nobody else has done before, right? And so, generally speaking, you're going to have people that are very well educated in the foundational information. You just have to convince them that you have the next right step. Now, if we look at something like Department of War, a lot of their experts are going to be in-house. So those are the engineers that they have in the Department of War, or it's the people who actually are dealing with the problem that was written into the topic. And so those people may not have the foundational information that would make them an expert in your solution, but they're an expert in the problem, if that makes sense. And then NASA, you'll see, I believe that most of their stuff, they do the reviews in-house, but they have different types of reviews. And so with NASA, you'll have a review that's about the technology that you're proposing, and then you'll have a completely separate review that's all about budget. And so do you have, or are you proposing a realistic budget based on um, what you're proposing in the actual work. And so because you've got two different reviews, you may not have an expert with the foundational knowledge who's doing the review of the budget, but they'll have to understand enough of what's going on to make your budget make sense. Does that help you out? Awesome. And so you might end up in a situation where you maybe think that you're not a great writer. And you might want to try to outsource some of this. And you might try and outsource some of it. You might try and outsource all of it. But um, I want you to keep some things in mind. First, technically, yes, you absolutely can. And we have a list of fantastic service providers that you can talk to potentially for helping you out with, you know, writing a proposal, doing your commercialization piece, helping you with budget. We've got people that can help you out. But a couple things to consider. First is the credibility. So, uh, as we see with the telephone game that's depicted in our little cartoon here, if you as an expert have to explain your information to somebody who's not an expert, but is a good technical writer, there will always be pieces that are lost from one person to the next. And so this is going to be an iterative process where you have to explain what it is you're working on. They'll write it, give it back to you. You'll have to review it, give it back. And then, of course, this will happen several times. And so you can get a very good grant that's written this way, but it will take more time. There's a little bit of a credibility piece. I don't think that it's as big of a concern if you're working with a grant writer because you can go back and talk to them and review those pieces. Um, it is expensive. And so you'll need to consider that. So we've got here that it could be $5,000 or more if you want a full proposal written. Generally, what our clients do is that they'll outsource a piece of it. So maybe they'll do the technical narrative because, of course, they are the experts in the field, so they'll be able to write that. And then maybe they outsource the commercialization piece, or maybe they outsource budget narrative. That may not be the best to try and outsource budget narrative if you've written the budget and you want somebody else to explain why, but it's something that you could do, right? And so consider that. And if you outsource a piece instead of the whole, it'll likely be cheaper. And the micro grants that we offer can help with service providers as well. And so just picking one or the other if you want to travel with it or if you want a service provider with it. And we're happy to help you out with that. I'll talk about AI in just a little bit, but one point before I move on here is so far there is no strong universal AI checker. And so and the agencies are not running your application through an AI checker. Some of them might try it, but in reality, they're not very reliable. And so could you write your application with AI? Technically, yes. But in reading it, it's usually very easy to tell who actually wrote their application and who used AI. So please don't do that. Um, Feel free to use AI to check grammar or to, if you have some sort of writer's block and you just need to get through to the next piece, or maybe it doesn't flow very well, you can get some, support on maybe figuring out how to make the pieces flow well together. Absolutely, you can use it for that, but please don't write your application with it. And I've seen some people that have sent me applications for review, and it was very clear that all they did was they went to ChatGPT and typed in, "This is the technology I'm working with. Please give me an SBIR ready proposal," and they handed me that, and it did not work. It looks really bad. So please don't do that.
John, if I may suggest, so because of the limit of the characters you can use or the words you can use for the proposal, I've been using successfully AI to shorten my text.
Mhm.
So that's, really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great use for it, is to shorten it down. One very strong word of caution that I have for you is do not give it proprietary information. All of the information that you give to ChatGPT or Perplexity or it doesn't matter which one you're using, all of them. All of the information that you give it then becomes training data for the next version. And so if you give it proprietary information, the company that created it now has your proprietary information and they can do with it whatever they want. Um, and if that information goes into training data, now somebody else is asking questions about how to do a similar project. Now they've got your information on how it works, and AI will just spit it out as a potential response for somebody else and give them the information that you've been working very, that you've been working hard to try and one, create, but two, to keep a secret. So please don't give it anything that you wouldn't go and shout out on the street. Um, so as you're getting started with the writing process, jumping back into the presentation here, uh, print out and read the solicitation. As you're reading it, write notes in the margins, highlight pieces, pay close attention to the important information and the revision notes at the top. Usually it's just correction of spelling or correction of some phrasing, but every now and then you'll see something in the revision notes that's maybe a corrected date. And so you'll need to pay attention just in case there's any important information up there that really does change the meaning or the context of the solicitation. Pay attention to the instruction section. This will give you all of the details on how to format your application. And so one of the things that we do here at FAST is to create checklists for you and templates to make sure that you are in compliance with all of these pieces. You want to read details of the topic very carefully. If there are any references that are cited, make sure you go and look them up. They're in there for a reason. And so in your application, do your best to use the references that are cited, right? If the topic author has decided that those are relevant and important to the topic, it's important for you to show that you see the relevance as well. So make sure that you're using their citations back in your application. Identify the different sections of your proposal. Again, you'll have some commonality across all the different agencies, but they might change the phrasing a little bit. So you'll always have your technical narrative where you're explaining what it is you're doing in the project. You'll always have budget narrative, uh, an area for resumes or CVs or bio sketches, whatever it is. You'll talk about the company. You'll talk about the commercialization. So those are going to be common across all of them, but make sure that you phrased it correctly in accordance with the agency that you're applying to, and also make sure that you have all of the pieces that they say that you need. They are going to be picky about line spacing, the page margins, page limits, all of those things. So make sure that you're following the instructions for that. And then if you have a title page or an abstract, and now the different agencies will require different things here, but make sure that, whatever it is they're asking for in those you're following as well, and you'll have different instructions for those compared to the rest of the application. And then in that as well, make sure that you absolutely do not have any proprietary information in title page or abstract or anything like that, because that is generally made public so that anyone can see the topics that are being applied to and what innovations are being proposed to those topics, especially if you win. So if you win an award, the abstract is absolutely made public. And I believe that there's a new push right now to make all applications have a public piece. So all those abstracts will be posted publicly. In the not too distant future, the Small Business Administration is working on that now. And then our last point here is page numbers. Do you have page numbers and where do they go? Review the agency priorities. I talked about that a little bit earlier. Identify the contact person or persons for the solicitation. You might have one general contact or you might have a specific topic author. So make sure that you're contacting the person that makes the most sense for the questions that you plan to ask. Keep an eye on the platform or website for any changes or amendments. This does tend to happen, especially we saw it last year happening quite often as there was some uncertainty on reauthorization or uncertainty with government shutdown and things like that. And so it's important that you stay up to date on any potential changes that are happening. An easy way to do that is to sign up for the agency newsletter that you are applying to. But if you wanted a daily check, you can go directly to the website of the agency that you're looking at. Identify the program manager for the agency that you're applying to. And again, this could be a very strong person for you to contact. I'll say it a lot, read the solicitation. It is very important. And for the first, I think, 2 or 3 SBIR conferences that I went to, I would go to all the tables for all the different agencies and ask, what can I do to help our clients have the best chance of success in applying? What do you see as the most common problem in applications that we can help to address? And almost all of the representatives said, make sure they read the solicitation, make sure they follow the rules. Because if you don't format correctly, or if you have too many pages, or if you are missing a section, or if any of the pieces aren't following the rules that are outlined in the solicitation, it just immediately gets rejected. Nobody reads it. And so you want to make sure that you make it through that first piece so that all of the checks are there before it goes to an actual person reading. And you want to make sure that you are definitely getting to somebody who's going to physically hold it in their hand and read it, right? One thing that we would suggest, of course, creating an outline and assign roles if you're working with a team, but create a timeline. And we recommend a reverse calendar. So find out what that end date is, the absolute drop dead have to submit date. And you start there with 0 and you work backwards to the present day, numbering up to figure out how much time you have, and then assign time for writing each of the different sections of the proposal to the time that you have left. And you know how long it takes you to write. And this is a decent way to essentially create a little Gantt chart for yourself, that tells you when the different pieces need to be finished and sent off to review before you start working on the next one or the next section, right? And make sure that at the very end, you leave time for review. That's very important. And hopefully you get someone that's a little bit mean, as I like to advise all of our clients. Make sure that the person who's reading it is not going to be a yes man for you. Make sure the person who's reading it is going to identify the holes in the application and tell you that there are holes in the application, because you will not get that courtesy from the reviewers later on. If they see problems with it, they'll simply say, don't fund, and move on to the next. If the evaluation criteria aren't in the request for proposals, the RFP, consider reaching out to that point of contact for any kind of clarifying that you need. Generally, they do have essentially a rubric, so they'll tell you what they're grading based on and what they're looking for in the solicitation, the RFP, NOFO, whatever it is that they're calling it. But in that solicitation is where you'll see it. Then you'll start writing. So strive for consistency across the different sections. That is a relatively hard part. You know, if you're writing a technical narrative and somebody else is writing the budget, making sure that the two talk to each other and make sure they flow well can sometimes be tricky. So what I'd recommend is, you know, if you have a team that you're working with, you split up the writing and then have a single person at the end review and massage all of it to make it fit. So anything that might sound different between the different writers, make sure that it's all compressed so that one person at the end writes it. It all sounds smooth. It all flows well. Questions at this point? No? Okay. So a little bit about proposal writing. Now, I know that this is a lot of information today and potentially not super exciting information, but it is very important. So your basic process, and this is a very simplified version, identify the funding opportunity, develop your proposal package, get it reviewed and submit it. Of course, it's going to take a lot more than just this. But as you are preparing to start writing, read the solicitation. And we've talked about why. Again, pay attention to things like font size, the type style that you're allowed to use, the section heading requirements, all of those things. And then always think about readability. And this is an important part because your communication style is going to influence the reviewer's perception of your application. So remember that you have to write in a way that the person on the other end, no matter if they're an expert in the field or they're not necessarily an expert in exactly what you're doing, but someone who is competent enough to read your application and what it is that you're working on, make sure that you write in a way that they are able to correctly interpret everything that you're trying to do. The readers and reviewers' responses are shaped by the situation, so make sure that you're aligned with the goals so that they have the correct frame of reference as they are reading your application. And then they're going to react moment by moment. So make sure that the tone you're using is consistent throughout. Make sure that the message you're trying to get across is consistent throughout. And make sure that all of the different sections are working well together. And so you're going to have essentially these different piles, right? So there's going to be a don't fund. So any application, this could be administratively rejected. So maybe you haven't followed everything in the solicitation. That can go into the don't fund pile, and anything that the reviewer says, yeah, I don't think that this is really a good fit. And it might be that simple. And that goes into don't fund. Maybe fund ends up being a backlog essentially of things that are okay fits, but they may not be the absolute best. And then, of course, the fund pile. Now, generally speaking, they have way more in the fund pile than they can actually fund. And so there will be another review later on where the program manager is going to have to go through and look at everything that was recommended for funding and determine which ones do and don't get funded. And so there are several steps to this process. The administrative review, did you complete the application? The reviewers, usually like Olga mentioned earlier, you've got a panel, there's usually 3 reviewers, and then they will either recommend for funding or not. And then all of those that get recommended for funding will have to be sorted out by the program manager who's going to look at them and determine, if it's in accordance with the directives, if it's a high priority to fund, or if it goes into that maybe fund pile where it's sort of a backup in case one of the other uh, applicants drop out. So as we are starting at the beginning here, make sure that everything that you're writing is centered on the reader. So help your reader find key information quickly. You can highlight it, bold it, put it in italics, whatever you need to do to make sure that the information that you are really trying to push is easy for them to find. Make sure that you write in a style that's easy to read. Make sure that, if there are pieces that need to be reiterated throughout, that you keep that consistent, you keep the consistent message throughout, and that you make sure that the important information is there in front of them in an easy format. Could be bullet points if you need, could be tables, and we'll talk about tables and figures in just a little here. But make sure that you are talking with your reader, not at them. And don't forget to do the research. Just because you're a subject matter expert and that this is your technology and that you're an expert in it, it doesn't mean that you've got all of the answers. There are still some things that you'll need to go and look up. First, demonstrate that you fully understand the reader's goals. So you are the expert in your technology and your business and what you're trying to do, but make sure that you've done your research about what the solicitation is asking for and why they're asking for it. Make sure that you are lined up and in accordance with that. Describe in detail the outcomes of your project. So what is it you expect to come from the end of this project? And then explain persuasively how your project is superior to alternatives. So you'll need to know what the current state of the art is. You'll need to know what your competitors are doing, and you'll need to be able to explain why you are better than everything else that's on the market. Feel free to use pictures and diagrams. Now, we've got a pros and cons here. Pros, it helps your reader to see the information quickly. They can visualize it. And generally, it makes more sense than if you just type everything out. It helps to show how different elements of the project are working together. It helps to show this schedule. So we have the PI schedule here, but of all of your key personnel. So you can have, we frequently talk about a Gantt chart, but that's a way to visually represent all the work that's being done and who's doing work on each of the different stages or each of the different tasks. And it's important that the principal investigator is shown doing at least 51% of their time. At least 51% of the principal investigator's time must be spent working for the business in an SBIR application. So this is an easy way to represent that. Some things to consider is make sure that you choose the right diagram. There are different types of charts that can be used, and some of them are more appropriate for certain situations than others. So make sure that you're using the correct one. Make sure that it has a professional look, that's not cartoony, that you've got the relevant information, your axes are labeled, that all the information is there, and make sure that you have a caption underneath it. Don't rely on color. The reason being is many of these reviewers still print it out, and very frequently they're printing it in black and white. So in your charts, make sure that you've got different sort of textured looks and not just different colors. And it makes it a lot easier for them. And then, of course, make sure that you are describing your graphic both in that caption underneath, but in the body of the text itself, make sure that you're referring to any images or figures that you've put in there. And that helps to show the relevance for the information that you're trying to provide. And make sure also that there's no ambiguity in the images and charts that you're trying to show. I've just got a couple of allusions here as representation of things that you don't want to do. You don't want to provide information that could be interpreted in any other way than what you're trying to explain. So make sure, once again, that what you're giving them is explained well, that the images show what you are trying to get across, and that there's no ambiguity. We talked about SMART goals in a prior session, but we just wanted to reiterate that here. This is important across the entire application. So from the very beginning in what it is that you're trying to accomplish, make sure that you are using the SMART framework. So make sure that everything is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. And that could be everything from the objectives that you've proposed, and then underneath those objectives, the specific tasks that are happening, make sure that all of them fit within this framework. And an easy way to make sure that you are fitting within the framework is to use something like this table. And so we've got the technical objectives over here on the left, and then as you go across from left to right, you can label all of the components that fit to make sure that it is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. I would not recommend putting this into your proposal. Don't use this table. But this is a good reference for you as you're writing to make sure that you have the information that's needed. Here are some guidelines for persuasion. Now, I mentioned that your application needs to be written in a persuasive manner. You're having a conversation with the person that's reading it. You're not just throwing information at them. So first, the idea is to listen. So look at the solicitation, see what they're asking for, make sure that you are writing to that, and that you are bringing up the topics that are in the specific solicitation. You are bringing up the problems that they have identified, and you're explaining first that you understand what the problem is from the perspective that they are writing, and that you have a solution that's going to answer in that same direction. So you want to focus on the reviewer's goals and values. So again, looking at the current administration, looking at the directives that have been given to the agency that you're writing toward. Address and learn from the reviewer's concerns and counter arguments. So this is where a review before you submit is going to be very important. Make sure that you can send it to me, or you can send it to somebody else that you know that's an expert in your field, but just somebody that's not part of the writing process. Make sure that you get outside of your company when you are getting the review. But identify potential holes or concerns and use that to iterate and create a better, stronger proposal. Reason soundly. So make sure that everything that you're saying has foundational information to support it. Organize to create a favorable response. Build an effective relationship with your reviewer. And it may be a little bit tricky to do that as you are writing because you don't know who the reviewer is, but make sure that the information you're putting in as you're talking about the problem that you're writing toward, you have a way to make that personal to just about anyone who's going to read it. Make sure that the impact of the problem that you are writing about is felt by the reader before you propose the solution. employ ethical persuasive techniques. And then we've got some drafting and revising information over here. So create a tight fit among all the different parts, provide sufficient reliable evidence, and then address likely counter arguments. And again, that's where the revising piece can come in. This is also a potentially good area for AI, is if you have a proposal, again, don't give it proprietary information, but if you hand that off to one of the AIs and you tell it, you give it the role of being an expert in whatever field you're writing in, and that its job is to look for potential holes or potential questions, potential counter arguments in your application. That can also produce some pretty good results without having an actual reviewer. So if you don't have anybody that is a close friend that could review for you that's outside of your agency that you're comfortable giving it to, that could be an option. Again, be very cautious about what you give it, but some of those outputs could be beneficial for you. So here we have an example sequence of the way that you can pull your reader through all the way from giving them some potentially learning information, some general background info in the introduction, to starting to persuade the reviewer that there is a problem. In a granting agency, this is a little more important that you really identify what the problem is and show them that there is a problem. Contracting agencies, they generally present the problem to you, but you have to let them know that you understand the problem from the perspective that they're writing. So you talk about the problem and then bring them the solution. So say, this problem has been identified. These are all the other alternatives, and this is what we're proposing, which is better than everything else. And so now you've presented it to them. Then you can start getting into the more granular detail where you're talking about the methods, resources, schedule, qualifications management, all of those things. And then even more granular, getting down to the costs of each of those different pieces. So you're starting wide and you're bringing it in to a much more narrow piece here. And that's a pretty common technique that writers often use, especially in an academic setting, as I call it the hourglass, where the information you provide at the beginning, the introduction is pretty broad, and you bring it in, your problem statement is much more specific. The objectives, of course, are specific to the problem statement, and you bring it into your work plan, which is going to be very specific to exactly what you're doing. And then after you give them the most specific piece here, you start to broaden it again, where you talk about the application of that solution, future potential work, and then broader impacts of the work as a whole. And so you start really wide, you bring it narrow, and you get wide again, just like we've got the hourglass here. In successful writing, we break this down into 5 pieces: preparation, research, organization, writing, and revision. And you'll see that writing is number 4 on the list. So there's a decent amount of work that goes into preparing to write. And this foundational work can help you have a much stronger writing process. So we'll break these down. In the preparation, establish your purpose, consider the context, select the medium. I'm not going to read everything out to you, but I'll read out some bits and pieces as we're going through the presentation. But essentially, understand the direction that you want to go and understand we have the medium here that's really given to you based on just the type of application that you're putting forward. And then you do the research. So brainstorm to determine what you know and what you don't know. Take notes. This could be going through the solicitation. It could be conversations with program managers, but take notes so that you understand more the direction that this needs to go in. Of course, avoid plagiarism. As you're doing your research, you'll likely pull in new information, make sure that all of that is cited, and then document your sources. In the organization, choose the best method of development, outline notes and ideas. And there's several different ways to do that. Consider layout and design, and then eliminate problems with grammar. And so having poor grammar in an application is a very sad reason to get rejected. So make sure that it's written very clearly so that it can be read well, understood cleanly. And one piece here that I would also recommend is do your best to avoid jargon. And I don't remember if that's in one of our later pieces here, but as best as you can, avoid jargon or industry specific terminology. There are some times when you can't get around it, but as best as you can, make sure that any acronyms you're using, you're explaining what they are the first time, that any of the jargon, you have some sort of explanation before you use that terminology that may be specific to an industry. Just make it as clear and easy for any audience as possible. And when you start writing, select an appropriate point of view, adopt an appropriate style and tone, construct effective paragraphs, and use appropriate citing. Um, Now, I haven't seen where there's a specific citation protocol for any of these agencies. I think that you're fine to use APA, MLA, just about whatever you want. But whatever you're doing, of course, first, confirm that with the solicitation. But second, make sure that it's consistent throughout. And then our last piece here is revision. Check for unity and coherence. Again, if you have multiple people that are writing, make sure that one person is in charge of blending all of the pieces together to make sure that the tone and the perspective and the way that it's written all is the same throughout. Check for sentence variety and structure. You don't want it to be boring. Check for clarity, complex, complete proposal checklists, and we do have some of those for you. Check the compliance matrix. We have that for you. And then have a third-party review. So I'm happy to review for you. If you have somebody that's an expert in the field that you would like to review, please just get somebody that isn't going to just glance at it and say, oh, yep, looks good. Additional principles of technical writing, of course, have good grammar and then be concise as much as possible. And so we've got a couple of examples of being concise here. And so I'll just read out a couple of them too. Instead of saying a large number of, you can simply say many. Instead of saying in the process of, you can say currently. And then instead of exhibits the ability, you can simply say demonstrates. Now, some of these might seem a little bit silly when you're reading them here, but in practice, one, you can save space, and so you can get more information in. But two, the fewer words you need to say the thing that you're trying to say, the better. It's just easier for the reviewer to really incorporate that information and to understand what you're trying to say with the least amount of effort on their part. And so it's an important piece. It may seem like it's not that strong, or maybe it's not that important to reduce the effort on the end of the reviewer. But in many cases, like we've talked about, if they are outsourcing the review process, like NSF, Department of Energy, and a couple of the others, they're asking for volunteers to review that are generally academics. So people that have expertise in that field, but that have other jobs. And so as an academic, you might have somebody that's taught two classes and graded papers all day and had office hours and had all their meetings and everything else. Generally, professors work weird hours and they get home at the end of the day and there's a stack of proposals that they have to read. And so you want to make sure that you're first making the problem real for them as quickly as possible so that it catches their attention and that they want to read the rest. And then second, you want to make it as easy for them to read as possible. Because the easier it is for them to read, the less effort that they have to put in, the more likely it is that they're actually going to stick with it and try a little harder to understand what it is you're talking about. And so another couple of things on the next few slides, things that are just going to make it a little easier for your reader. Here we have use active voice. So say we are doing XYZ instead of saying XYZ will be done by and then insert a person. And I do have an example here. So look for, oh, okay. So the example here, in an active voice, you would say researchers earlier showed that high stress could cause heart attacks. And then in a passive voice, and this is what we're trying to avoid, it could sound like it was earlier demonstrated that heart attacks could be caused by high stress. And so if you want to convert sentences from passive to active, look for that by phrase. And so we have here the by high stress in our example. Not every sentence can be in an active voice. Sometimes you will have passive, and there are some times for that. If the subject of the sentence is somewhat anonymous, see if you can use general terms such as researchers, the study, experts in the field, whatever it is. And then we've got our little pin diagram over here. First, use active sentences unless you have a good reason to choose passive. Convert passive sentences to active by rethinking or rewording the sentence. Use a passive sentence when you do not know or when you do not want to mention the actor. And so that's when you potentially would look for passive instead of active. Use a passive sentence when the receiver is more important than the actor. And then finally, use personal pronouns and active voice to convey responsibility and clarity. And so it's easier to read. It shows that you are taking charge of the situation. You are doing the thing. And it really helps your proposal. Another, and again, this is a relatively small thing when you're just looking at it by itself. But in a whole, if you're looking at it on a bigger picture, this really does help. So using positive statements instead of negative statements. And so negative statements could be do not close the valve. But a positive statement would be leave the valve open. And again, it's just a small piece that helps the reader to understand quickly. They don't have to think about what they should do. You've told them what they should do. Don't tell them what not to do, because then they have to think about what they're supposed to do. Also try to avoid long sentences when possible. Long sentences do take more time to process and interpret. Try and break those into multiple sentences or cut out unnecessary words. Use bullets when you can, things like that. Make sure that you're punctuating correctly. Again, seems a little bit small, but it does help to show more credibility of the team that's writing it. It helps to show that, you are paying attention to detail in the small things here specifically. And so that helps you out later down the road. Hopefully you're paying attention to the detail in your project as well. So we've got a couple of examples here. Now, this isn't everything that you need to know about punctuation, but commas, periods, colons, semicolons, they all go inside when you're using quotation marks. And then semicolons and colons go outside when you're using quotation marks. Again, it's a relatively simple thing. And this isn't everything that you need, but a couple of examples we have here. I talked a little bit about AI previously, and we've got that for you here in a little bit more detail. So should you use it? It may be, right? Almost everybody is going to be using it. So if you're not using it, there's a chance that you are putting in more effort than necessarily needs to happen. There's a chance that, maybe you're missing things that other people are going to be able to catch if they're using AI. Again, don't give it any proprietary information. If you do plan to use it, please don't use it to write your application. But as Olga mentioned, a review to maybe shorten the information or to find holes to help you if you get writer's block, things like that. We've got some pros here, conquering writer's block, quickly collate data. It is pretty good in most cases. If you give it a bunch of data, it can spit out a graph for you. Helps you out with some time efficiency, enhances language in some cases, or could be good for idea generation. Some cons, of course, it is a robot. It lacks we have human touch, but it really lacks understanding. So it doesn't know what it is that you're working on. It has no real consciousness behind it. And so it's an algorithm behind the scenes is really a black box. It really just It's a mathematical formula that's trying to identify the best fit for the next word in the sentence. And that's how AI works. And that's what's happening behind the scenes. There are some ethical concerns about plagiarism. Is it stealing copyrighted information? Um, so if you're using it and if it does give you citations, please go and actually check those citations. Make sure that that's real. And you see that in, um, they call it AI hallucinations or AI slop. Um, if it gives you a or if it gives you a citation, excuse me, always make sure that you tell it to give you the link to that citation so that you can go and check it yourself. It happens pretty frequently where it will just create a citation and say that information can be found here. And then if you use that citation without checking it, there's a chance that it is just gibberish, that that article never existed and the information that's in it is just kind of random information. So make sure that you always go and check. It does lack creativity. It doesn't have a way to make new ideas the way that humans do. Um, Risk of getting caught is a little bit of gray area, and then security concerns. So if you're using it, again, don't give it any proprietary information. NSF has released a memo that says if you are using generative AI, you have to disclose that. I have not seen this with the other agencies yet, but I do expect this will probably be coming up um, more frequently with the other agencies as well. Again, like I mentioned before, there's no real way to check. There's no universal way to check, I'll say, if AI was used, but if it sounds like a robot wrote it, a robot probably wrote it. And that's sort of a gut check that most of these agencies are using. It's just as they're reading it, does it sound like a person who is actually an expert in the field wrote it, or is it a little bit vague? Does it have some odd phrasing? Are there things in there that, would potentially indicate that it wasn't written in the standard format that people would typically write? In the evaluation of your application, most of these agencies are going to be using a similar structure to evaluate. And so these are some common areas that you'll see. Is the proposal formatted correctly? Have you presented a plausible solution? Is the proposal organized? Do all the different components work together? Are all of the proposal requirements met? Have you provided an acceptable delivery schedule? So are you fitting the period of performance? Have you demonstrated your capability to perform? So do you have the correct team? Do you have the correct facilities to be able to perform what it is that you said that you will? Have you demonstrated related experience in past performance history? Is your financial situation stable? So can you perform the function that you said you can with the funding that's available? Are you proposing a reasonable price for the project? So they'll be looking at the budget. And then are your costing methods credible? And so with many of these agencies, and I hear this most frequently with NASA, but I believe Department of War does it and potentially some of the others, when you submit your application, if it's accepted, there will be a negotiation period where they will sit down with you and look at the budget and say, is this really necessary? And if you've written out everything to the best of your ability and everything is necessary, you can argue yes, that it is necessary and just give them that foundational information as to why you say that it is. We are getting close to time here, so I'll try and wrap up this last piece here quickly. Things to avoid. Starting late. Please don't start late. We have had those horror stories about people that try to submit last minute, doesn't get through. Or I think this one is even worse, really. If you have a team that's working together and you split up the work, you try to compile it the day before to submit it and realize that not all of the work is done. Not all of the sections have been written thoroughly. And that's also a problem. So both of these problems could be avoided if you just started a little bit earlier so that you give yourself a little bit more time to hammer out any potential inconsistencies there. If there's a lack of planning, that could be a problem, or not addressing the key questions. And we have the who, what, when, where, why, and how as questions that will need to be answered. So really just being thorough and following the SMART format. We do have some common pitfalls. Again, not following the directions. Like I mentioned, that is the biggest thing that most of the agencies say is the most important part for our clients, to make sure that you are reading the instructions and following those instructions. If you ignore existing solutions, so if you're not caught up on the current state of the art, if you don't know what other companies are doing, that's a problem. Incomplete or late submissions, failure to demonstrate significance. If you're overly ambitious, that could be a little bit of a problem. Lack of measures of success, and that goes back to the SMART framework. A lack of technical detail, so if it's too vague, that's a problem. Lack of understanding of agency needs. Again, you need to do a little bit of research there, figure out the direction that your application needs to go and how it needs to be framed. And then the evaluation criteria components are not addressed. So if any of these things happen, of course, these are pretty common pitfalls for people. We've got just a couple of minutes here. The activity for this week is to create a quad chart. A quad chart is a one-page document that you can use to quickly get information about your business to the person that you are having a conversation with. So it's like a one-pager, if you've ever had to write one of those. But it's called a quad chart because there are 4 specific sections that you're writing about. There's the technology development, company introduction, research need, and the opportunity. There are multiple variations of this, but we're going to present the one that the Small Business Administration recommends. And so here's the format. You've got your company information across the top, company, state, name, email, phone number. In this, make sure that the email and phone number are actually versions that you check frequently. Because if they have questions, you'll need to be able to respond quickly. In the technology development, you have a little bit of an overview of what it is that you're working on, what your innovation is. You've got a company introduction to give a little information about, your mission, when you started, how many people you have, those sorts of things. You've got opportunity. So what is the problem that you are addressing? And then what is the market that you can fill in the creation of your innovation? And then the research need. So what is it that you're trying to do? What's the problem that you see, your technical challenges? So what are the technical challenges that you have that you are trying to overcome? So your homework for this week is going to be filling that out. I'll have that in the Google Drive for you. And so if you can email that to me, and give me, a day or two advance so that I can look at them and review them and potentially give you some feedback on that. We might be able to discuss them in our next section, but I think that it'd just be a little bit easier to, send you the feedback directly, and potentially that would keep some of the information you're working on a little bit more private if you'd like that as well. Next week, we're going to start looking at some best practices and some commercialization information. That's what I've got for us for this week. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. If you are having trouble with SAM.gov, Apex Accelerators is a good option for you. Also, if you don't see a good fit with other SBIR agencies, Apex Accelerators can help you find other funding opportunities as well. So don't feel like you have to be stuck in SBIR, that this is the only option for you. There are many other options, and Apex can help you out with that. I believe that we just hit time, so I will stop talking. If you have any questions, I'm happy to hang out and answer those. If not, thank you for coming, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks, John. Have a good
Thank
week.
you.
Okay, thanks.
Sean, I have several questions, if you don't mind.
Okay, absolutely.
So, yeah, it's always a question if the title pages and like the numbers of the pages would be counted towards the word or character limits? Like some of the agencies, they require the title page, right? Is the title page will be count towards that the limit they set up for the proposal?
That's going to be agency specific, but in general, I don't think that it is, unless, yeah, a title page I don't think is, but I believe if you're working with someone like NASA who has they want you to put in a table of contents is, I couldn't figure out the word, sorry. But the table of contents is part of the technical narrative, and so that does count. So you'll have a page that is essentially lost to that.
Okay. Another question. So a couple times in your slides today, you've been referencing to Anderson 2011. What is that?
I have not gone to read Anderson 2011, and I probably should, but
I mean, can you share that? Is that like a book or whatever? Is it paper, like white paper, something? So would appreciate if you share it. So
I I'll go looking for it and I'll share it as soon as I have it. I'll put that in a follow-up email.
okay, two more questions. So how many citations or the references should be, well, ideally should be under bibliography?
I don't know that there's a perfect number. Um, I would be tempted to say somewhere close to 10, but that's
Okay.
kind of a gut feeling. Um, I mean, however many you need is the real answer. You know what?
Yeah, but sometimes you just cited like a few words out of the white paper, right? Should
Mm,
I make those citation like post it in the bibliography, or I mean it's sometimes I need to post more, and so
mhm,
I would post every single little piece, but sometimes I just put the major sources.
right.
Okay, and one more question. So we're gonna touch on budgeting next time. Are we going to go through the indirect costs?
Yeah, I'll talk about that.
I believe that the numbers has been changed for a global and indirect percentage, right?
Yeah, it used to be standard close to 40% could be indirect cost. And there was a big push last year to reduce that number. And so I know Department of Energy cut theirs from 40% to 14%, which is an insane reduction.
And the minimum is still 10, right?
I'm sorry, say again?
The de minimis. So, like when we applied to DOE and USDA, there was a de minimis percentage for indirect rates. So, and I believe there was 10%. And if you utilize de minimis, they would not even ask you to um, what is called? I'm sorry, my brain is tired.
That's okay. They
Yeah,
wouldn't
to go
ask you to
line by
explain it.
line to explain everything, they will just take that 10% and that's it.
Yeah. But I believe it's very similar still. So if you include an indirect rate in the application, most agencies don't ask you to explain where the indirect rate is going. They just want you to keep it below a certain percentage.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you. Looking
Hmm.
forward for the next one.
Yeah,
Thanks.
absolutely. Yeah, thank you. It's good questions today.
Bye bye.